I always believed peace would come with old age, that after burying my husband and watching my children move across oceans, my little cottage in the countryside would finally offer quiet, the wind through the willow trees, the smell of wet soil after rain, and the faint hum of bees around my lavender patch. These were supposed to be my companions. But peace, as I learned one gray morning, can vanish in a single sound, the sound of a shovel striking earth. It began with that soft, deliberate thunk, 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 coming from the far edge of my garden just before dawn. At first, I thought it was a fox digging for worms, but the rhythm was too human, steady, patient, as though whoever was doing it had all the time in the world. I drew my cardigan tighter, stepped onto the porch, and peered into the mist. There, half hidden beneath the shadow of my old oak tree, was my caretaker, Evelyn. Evelyn had worked for me for nearly 3 years, a quiet woman in her 40s with short, ashen hair and hands, always covered in gardening gloves. She had become part of the landscape. I trusted her more than I trusted my own reflection. She watered my plants, cooked my meals, and on lonely evenings she'd even sit with me on the veranda and listen to my endless stories about the war years and my late husband, Charles. She rarely spoke about herself. I assumed she'd had a difficult life. Something in her eyes said so. That morning, she was bent over a fresh patch of soil, the lantern light casting her face in yellow shadows. She froze when she realized I was watching. "Oh, Mrs. Harper," she stammered, dropping her shovel. "You shouldn't be up this early. Go inside, it's cold." "What are you burying at this hour?" I asked, forcing a small laugh. "You look like a ghost digging its own grave." Her smile was thin. "Just replanting the hydrangeas. The soil's better while it's cool." It sounded odd, who plants flowers before sunrise? But I was too polite, too old to question much. I nodded, went back inside, and made my tea. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her bent figure, the hurried way she covered whatever she'd placed in the hole. The next afternoon, I walked to the same spot. My knees ached with every step, but curiosity can make an old woman young again. There was no sign of hydrangeas, only freshly packed earth and a faint rectangular outline, as though something solid lay just beneath. For days I told myself to forget it. Evelyn was kind, gentle, she wouldn't harm me. But something had changed. She became tense, her eyes flicking toward the garden whenever I passed a window. Once I saw her standing by that same patch at dusk, not working, just staring as if listening to the soil. Then one evening, while she was out buying groceries, I decided to dig. The spade felt heavier than it used to. My bones protested with every motion. The air was damp, thick with the scent of coming rain. I dug just enough to see the edge of something wooden. My heart hammered. It was a small chest, no larger than a bread box, bound in rusted metal hinges. I brushed off the dirt with my trembling hands. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. "Evelyn!" I panicked. I kicked loose soil back into the hole, covered what I could, and hurried toward the house. She called my name as she came through the back gate. "Mrs. Harper, were you outside?" I was checking the bird feeders, I lied, wiping mud from my palms. The robins have been stealing everything. Her eyes darted to the garden. For a second, I swear I saw fear, raw, unguarded fear, flash across her face. She smiled too quickly after that. "You should let me handle the garden, dear. You'll hurt yourself." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway made my skin prickle. I imagined her creeping into my room, imagined her burying another box, only this time not in the garden. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Yet the next morning, when I woke up, I found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the kitchen. Evelyn swore she'd gone out early to water the roses, but it hadn't rained. The mud was from that same patch of disturbed ground. Something was inside that box, something she didn't want me to see. I tried to distract myself. I wrote letters to my son in Canada, baked scones for the neighbor, even watched one of those dreadful afternoon dramas. But curiosity gnawed at me like termites in old wood. Finally, 3 nights later, I made up my mind. When Evelyn went home for the weekend, she always left Saturday evening and returned Monday morning. I would dig it up completely. Saturday came with thunder. The sky cracked open, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. Perfect. No one would see me through the storm. I grabbed a lantern, my gloves, and the old shovel from the shed. The wind howled through the branches as I stepped into the garden. The earth was soft, almost eager to give way. I dug until the box lay fully exposed, glistening in the rain. My lantern light flickered across its wet surface. There was no lock, just a latch crusted with rust. I hesitated. My heart thudded in my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, terrified, but alive. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a collection of old photographs, dozens of them, all black and white, edges curled with time. The first one made me gasp. It was of a young woman, me standing in front of this very cottage, smiling, holding my baby son. Charles had taken that picture 50 years ago. How did Evelyn have it? I flipped through the rest. There were more photos of my husband, our family, even pictures taken inside my house, long after Charles died. Some were recent. I recognized my current furniture, my kitchen curtains. My hands began to tremble. Then, at the bottom, a letter. The paper was yellowed, but the handwriting, that neat, looping cursive, was unmistakable. It was my husband's. My breath caught. Charles had been dead for nearly 30 years. The letter was addressed to "My dearest Evelyn." I dropped it. The rain hissed around me, and for a moment the world tilted. Evelyn, my caretaker, was the Evelyn from Charles's past. My mind raced. I picked the letter up again, hands shaking so hard the paper nearly tore. The first lines blurred as I read, "My darling Evelyn, I know we cannot meet again, but one day you'll return for what I left behind. Keep it safe until then." The rest was smudged, but one word stood clear at the end: "Forgive." I stumbled back, clutching the letter to my chest. Lightning split the sky. My husband, my faithful Charles, had hidden something, and Evelyn had come back for it decades later. But what? The box felt heavier now, as if holding not just objects but ghosts. and as I turned toward the house, I noticed a second hole freshly dug a few feet away from where the box had been. It was empty. The empty second hole gaped at me like a missing tooth in the mouth of my garden, raw and obscene in the rain. I shuffled closer, lantern held against the sheets of water, and felt the mud yield beneath my shoes. It wasn't deep. Whoever had dug it hadn't finished. That frightened me more than if it had been neatly filled. It meant someone had been interrupted, or intended to come back. Back inside, I locked every door, something I hadn't done in years. My house had always felt like a friend that breathed with me, that kept my memories warm at night. Now every room looked like a stranger in bad light. I set Charles's letter on the kitchen table and watched the water run off the oilcloth photographs in little silver rivers. My younger face stared up at me. The summer dress with the tulips at the hem. My baby's hand clenched around my finger. A memory sharp enough to cut. My dearest Evelyn. The words pulsed in my chest, like a bruise I kept pressing to see if it still hurt. I had met Charles when I was 19. He had a laugh like sunlight on water, and a way of looking at me that made the world fall silent. He had never called another woman darling in front of me, not even on a scrap of paper. And yet the pen had been his. The curl of the Y, the stern way he crossed his T's, how many grocery lists and Sunday notes had I watched him write? The storm thrashed through the night. Toward dawn I must have dozed at the kitchen table, because I woke with a cramp in my neck and the sour taste of fear on my tongue. I went to my bedroom and tucked the letter into the false bottom of the sewing box that had been my mother's, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender sachet and old thread. The photographs I slid beneath the mattress. You learn a kind of quiet cunning when you live long enough. You learn how to hide things from sadness. Evelyn returned on Monday morning precisely at 8, the way she always did, a punctuality that had once comforted me. She carried a bag of apples and a loaf of rye bread, and her hair, damp from mist, stuck to her forehead. I poured tea, my hands steady from practice. "How was your weekend?" she asked, setting the apples gently into the blue bowl. Charles had bought me our first summer in this cottage. "Rainy," I said. "I slept poorly. I could hear the thunder from town." Her gaze slid past me to the window. "Anything. Blow over. Just branches. I sipped. And you." She took a breath. "Quiet." We were two women in a tiny kitchen arranged like a stage, no audience, only our facades. I watched her fingers around the teacup. No ring, of course. She never wore jewelry. I thought of the letter again, of a different kind of ring that should have been given and never was. "Why were you burying a box?" I asked, so evenly I surprised myself. The sound her cup made when it touched the saucer was the sound of a small thing breaking. She didn't answer, just looked at me with those gray eyes that could be soft as smoke or cold as stone. "Hydrangeas," she said at last, voice careful, like stepping around glass. I dug it up. I put my hand palm down on the table, as if pinning the truth there. I opened it. Her color drained. "You shouldn't have. I found photographs of my family, recent ones, and a letter from my husband." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were older. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, though the confessing hurt her mouth like salt. "Tell me now." I leaned in. In that moment, I was not a frail widow. I was the wife of a man who had kept a secret and the keeper of a garden that no longer slept. She was silent a long time. The clock above the stove ticked in steady disapproval. Finally, she said, "My mother told me his name was Charles Harper." The kitchen tilted. "She said he was kind to her when kindness was rare. She said he promised to write, and he did, until he didn't. She kept the letters in a tin behind a row of flower jars and died with them still warm in her hands like embers she couldn't quite let go of." Evelyn's gaze flicked toward my hands. "He was your husband. He was my father." The word hit the room with the softest and most devastating thud I'd ever felt. Father. I saw Charles as a young teacher, his shirt sleeves rolled, chalk dust on his cuffs, eyes that lived in the present and yet somehow always studied the horizon. Could he have loved two women in the same season? Could he have loved one before me and then carried that love as a folded letter in his coat pocket forever? There was only one letter in that box. I managed. "Addressed to you," he wrote. "Forgive." She nodded like a penitent who had memorized the liturgy of grief. "There were others years ago. My mother destroyed them when she realized he'd married. She didn't want to poison me with longing. But she told me his name, and when she was dying she told me to find him. I came here and found only you. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked on the "you." "Because you were kind," she said simply. And the words wounded more than any betrayal. Because kindness is rarer than truth. I looked at her, the woman who made my tea, who folded my shawls so the fringes didn't tangle, who carried my groceries and my gossip and my silences for 3 years, and she became at once stranger and kin. "And the box?" I asked softly. "Why bury it?" Her hand tightened on the table edge until the knuckles went white. "Because someone was looking for it." "Who?" She swallowed. "The man who's been watching the house." I felt the room shrink around me. "What man?" "There's a white car," she said. "It parks by the lane on Tuesdays when your son calls from Canada. It parks when the post comes, and again when you nap. He wears a cap. The first time I saw him, he was standing in your garden at dusk, as if measuring it. Yesterday morning, before dawn, I heard footsteps by the oak. That's why I came early. And that's why—" her voice thinned. "That's why there's a second hole. The house inhaled. You didn't dig it?" "No." She shook her head. "I only dug the first. To put the box where no one but me could find it. The second hole was there when I came back. Someone else opened the earth." I felt my heart reach for my chest the way a ship reaches for shore in fog, blind, desperate. I thought of the blank second hole, the faint print of a boot beside it. The apples in the blue bowl gleamed with unholy brightness. "Then what is he looking for?" I asked. Evelyn set her chin, that stubborn angle I'd seen when she bullied weeds out of the path. "Not the photographs," she said. "Not the letter. Those are dead things. He's looking for something living. A deed, a key, a code. Whatever your husband buried for me, Mrs. Harper, whatever he wrote, keep it safe about someone else knows it exists. And why now?" My voice was smaller than I meant it to be. She looked down at the teacup as at a crystal that might finally show the image straight. Because you told your son you were thinking of changing your will. I had, in an offhand, weary way, the way old women test the world to see who loves them or their silver. The phone had clicked oddly that Tuesday, a tiny insect of sound on the line. I think someone is listening to you. She rose, sudden as a decision, and I think they believe whatever Charles left for us could keep this land from being sold. Us, I repeated. It didn't sting. It settled. We moved then, a choreography that neither of us had rehearsed. I fetched the sewing box. She closed the curtains. I slid the letter into her hands. She slid the photographs into the oven drawer, where nobody ever looks unless they're hungry for heat. The storm had gone, but the air still felt charged, full of invisible messages. "Tonight," she said, cradling the letter as if it were a bird that might frantic itself against a window, "we'll look where the empty hole points." "What do you mean?" She smiled, a tired, wry little bend of mouth that looked so like Charles for an instant that my bones sang. Men who hide things leave patterns. Second holes are not accidents. They're arrows. I took her arm because my knees were old, yes, but also because that day we became two women who shared a father and a garden and a war we had not chosen. We stood together at the back door and looked out. The oak's shadow lay long across the soil, and beyond it the line of willow trees stirred as if whispering a direction. "North by 3 paces," Evelyn murmured, reading their breath. "And then down." "Down to what? To what your husband wanted to be found," she said. "By you and me. Not by a man in a white car." The wind shifted. Somewhere a gate clicked. The day turned its cheek, offering its other face, and I felt something open in me that had been closed for 30 years. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the strange electric courage that comes when grief and love stand on the same patch of earth and decide not to run. "Tonight," I said. "Tonight," she agreed, and the house, my faithful old friend, seemed to nod. We waited for darkness the way children wait for birthdays, restless, with too much thinking. The afternoon staggered past in chores we pretended were important. I polished spoons that didn't need it. Evelyn folded towels into perfect rectangles and then unfolded them as if breath had gotten trapped in the corners. At 5, the white car appeared at the lane as surely as illness follows a cough. It idled, then crept away when 2 dog walkers passed, then returned. My heart paced the kitchen. "Let him watch an empty garden," Evelyn said. "We'll move when the watching gets bored." At 8, we turned off every light but one low lamp. We spoke in that whisper meant for sick rooms and secrets. When the cottage settled into its nighttime bones, we slipped through the back door like younger women wearing the shadow of our younger bravery. The soil was damp velvet beneath my shoes. The lantern made a shy egg of light that seemed to breathe with us. We stood by the empty hole, its shape now a dark mouth, and listened, nothing but the cotton hush of evening. Evelyn lifted her chin to the oak, took 3 steps to the north, and tapped the ground with the spade. "Here," she said, but softly, as if the earth were easily startled. "We dug like thieves, like mourners, like daughters." The lantern's flame jittered in the wind, nervous about everything we were doing. A foot down the spade struck wood, Not a box, a plank, the kind that suggests the edge of something larger. Evelyn scraped away soil with her gloved fingers until it revealed itself. A small trap door. The kind of practical thing old English gardens sometimes hid for cistern access. Only we had no cistern there. Not in my memory. She brushed clean the iron ring set into the plank. "Do you want," she began. "I'll do it." My voice surprised us both. I gripped the ring and lifted. The wood groaned. A shallow void yawned beneath us, and the smell of old stone floated up, cool as a cellar's breath after a hymn. We lowered the lantern into the space. It wasn't deep 4 feet, perhaps. Just large enough to hold a weatherproof tin chest, the sort a man might buy if he wanted something to outlast his weather. The chest was bound in a leather strap with a brass clasp. It was not locked. For a moment we just looked. My pulse traveled through me like footsteps downstairs in a quiet house inevitable, coming nearer. "Open it," Evelyn said. "No," I said, and smiled despite our night. "We're past commands. We do this together." So we knelt side by side and lifted the lid. Inside lay papers wrapped in oilskin, their edges crisp still, the ink of decades preserved by someone who understood practical romance. On top, a letter. My breath caught at the sight of the first line. "To my wife and to the child who bears my name without my ring." I touched the paper as you touch a loved one's forehead after a fever, to see if the heat has left. Some words were faded, but most lived. When a man sins against truth, he sins against the future. I sinned, not by loving, which is the oldest honesty, but by failing to speak. I have been a coward in the one place where bravery mattered at home. Forgive me for the long cowardice of my silence. I cannot undo it, but I can protect you both from the greed of men who do arithmetic with grief. The breath I'd been holding turned itself into tears. The next pages were deeds. A transfer of a portion of the property into a trust he named for me, with a remainder to E.M., a name that could be me or her, as if he had carved ambiguity to keep us both safe. There was also a sealed envelope labeled "For the bank safety deposit Hayshones 7," and a smaller folded note that simply said, "If I am gone, and they come with abacuses in their eyes, show them this first." I laughed, a helpless little sound in the dark. Abacuses in their eyes. He had always fancied words. Evelyn's hand hovered, uncertain which item to rescue first. "He named me," she whispered, not looking at me. "He named me with initials, even as he hid me, the way men hide the tenderest part of their throat. And he named me," I said, touching the trust papers. "He gave us geography together. There was something else, wrapped tighter, addressless." We unwound the oilskin and found a small, battered notebook, pages of neat script, dates, entries, all in Charles's tidy schoolmaster hand. The first pages recorded household repairs, harvests of apples, roof thatches hired, the banal domestic heroic. Then, about 2/3 through, the handwriting grew heavier, urgent. November 3. The headmaster raised my salary. The council at church says the county eyes our lane for a bypass. If they come, they will use words like progress. If they come, this cottage will become arithmetic. December 14. I saw her again. The child's hair is my mother's. She is called Evelyn. I am a coward who prays. I have set in motion what I can. The trust will hold against the road and against men who put numbers before names. And then an entry that made Evelyn's hand fly to her mouth. January 22. A man named Whitby came asking about deeds. He works for a property group with a quiet appetite. He knew where the survey stakes were before we did. He knows about the old well. He said, "My wife is fortunate to be so alone. I will leave a map, the shape of a story." We looked at each other. "Whitby?" I said. "Does he have sons or grandsons?" Evelyn replied, "Appetite is hereditary." She lifted the packet of deeds and found at the bottom a photograph. Me again, and a blurred figure in the background near the oak, as if the camera had caught a man turning away. On the back, Charles had written, "The past is a patient fox." The patient fox in our present was in a white car. We rewrapped the documents and slid them back into the chest for the moment. My legs had begun to tremble from kneeling. Not fear this time, but the insistence of the years asking to be respected. Evelyn helped me up. We closed the trap door, drew the soil over it gently, and patted it down the way mothers calm blankets over sleeping children. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go to the bank." "And tonight," I said, "we see if the fox is still on the lane." We returned to the house, extinguished the lantern, and peered from the lace of the curtain. The white car sat under the drooping branch of the beech, as if it had always been part of the landscape. A figure leaned forward over the wheel, impatient with our darkness. "Call the police?" Evelyn asked. "And tell them what? That my dead husband left us a paper spine and a fox?" I shook my head. "We need something that bites." Evelyn's mouth shaped a plan that looked like mischief any smart child would admire. "Let him think the garden is empty," she said, "and let him see you throw a decoy into your bin." "What decoy?" "Old recipe cards." Her eyes glittered. "In an envelope marked bank." "You're wicked," I said, and felt more alive than I had in years. We moved like burglars with moral clarity. I wrote "bank" on a tired envelope and filled it with recipes my arthritis no longer let me attempt. I set it into the kitchen bin with theatrical care near the window. 2 minutes later, the white car's door opened. A man stepped out, cap, dark jacket, the impatience of someone who has never been told no. He walked up my drive with a purposeful casualness, glanced around, and lifted the bin's lid. He took the envelope. He looked inside, scowled at someone he couldn't see, and walked back to his car with his anger folding his body like bad origami. "Hook," Evelyn whispered. "Line." "Now we wait for the sinker," I said. We stood together, two silhouettes in a cottage whose walls had learned our secrets, and listened to the night adjust itself around our plan. Somewhere an owl asked the only question that matters. "Who?" "Tomorrow," I repeated. Evelyn nodded. "Tomorrow." And in my heart, the future. A place I had stopped visiting unlatched a window and let in wind. The bank smelled like varnish, paper, and a little like strangers' hands. We wore our best, my navy coat with the pearl buttons, Evelyn's grey cardigan that made her eyes look like weather on the good days. The clerk, A young woman with a smile that had not yet met catastrophe asked for my identification and for the key to box 17. I set Charles's envelope on the counter with the gravity of a communion plate. The box did not live behind a dramatic vault door like in films. It slid from a wall of tidy metal mouths with a dull, efficient sigh. We were ushered into a windowless room that borrowed dignity from silence. The clerk left us alone. My fingers could not help it. They shook. Evelyn steadied the lid with a daughter's patience. Inside lay another oilskin wrap, Charles's favorite material for doing the right thing badly, and a smaller tin, almost cheerful in its red enamel, as if trying to look like a sweet box at Christmas. The oilskin held a formal deed, the creation of a protective covenant that prevented the land from being sold for commercial development without the consent of both beneficiaries, named as Margaret Harper and E.M. There it was again, the ambiguity that was mercy and mess in equal measure. It was dated 2 months before Charles died. My breath broke, traveling through me. The red tin contained a scattering of things that ought to have been sentimental but looked like weapons now. A photograph of a sign that read, Whitby Holdings, a clipping from the county newspaper about proposed road diversions with a map that kissed our lane, and a folded sheet with 2 names, Walter Whitby and Graham Whitby, and a line under them, Ask at the registry. Men who eat maps must register their teeth. Oh, Charles, I whispered, half prayer, half exasperation. You poetically paranoid old darling. There was also something that should not have been in a bank box, because it should have been on my mantelpiece, a small locket I had lost the winter after his death. The tiny catch had broken that year, and I had wept more than a trinket deserved, because grief assigns jewelry the weight of a person. I had thought the cold had simply hidden it somewhere until spring. Inside, the locket held a photograph of me on one side, and on the other, God help me, an infant I did not know then. Her face was a rosebud of a person, and the scrap of paper beneath said, Careful and devastating, Evelyn. Something softened in me that had been determined not to for my own dignity, for my long marriage's clean narrative. I pressed the locket into Evelyn's palm. This was always yours, I said, and watched as her throat tried to swallow gratitude and pain at once. We left the bank feeling armored and vulnerable, the way one feels after confession, cleaned and exposed. On the steps, a man in a cap lifted his phone and pretended to consult it. Evelyn saw him first. She moved in front of me, small and formidable. Graham? She said to the man, as if greeting a neighbor she meant to shame. His face blinked surprise, then settled into an expression men wear when their fathers have told them they are entitled to land and women and answers. Can I help you? You can stop skulking, she said, and you can tell your father that if he wants to build his bypass through a widow's garden, he'll have to dig through the bones of a trust first, he sneered. It was a weak sneer. You could see the thin muscles that held it up. You have no right to any of this. The old man left it to his proper family, not to strays. Strays, I repeated, because sometimes you must say an insult aloud so its shape becomes clear and you can break it. Mrs. Harper, he said, turning to me with a politeness that stank of calculation, your son has been very worried about you. He asked us, What did my son ask you? My voice cut the air in a way that surprised all three of us. He hesitated the merest flicker a tell and then recovered into smoothness. Only to look out for you. This is a confusing process. Deeds, covenants, difficult for the old, I offered. Gentle as poison. His eyes went flat. He tipped his cap and moved off with the gait of a man who knows he is being watched and imagines that makes him interesting. We stood on the bank steps, the winter sun pretending warmth it did not have, and understood something new. This was not simply about land. It was about men whose appetites needed constant strangers to keep them fed. It was about a son who had perhaps said too much to the wrong voice on the phone. It was about a husband who had tried, clumsily and nobly, to protect two women with paper and poetry. Registry, Evelyn said. If Whitby Holdings has been sniffing around this land since your husband's time, they'll have their snout prints somewhere. We spent 2 hours under the fluorescent fatigue of the county registry office, where history lives in filing cabinets, and board clerks wear the faces of saints who've accidentally been assigned to paperwork. We found entries. Whitby Holdings had applied for variances twice in the last 30 years, both denied after public outcry and passionate speeches by people whose hedges would be ruined by progress. Recently, within the last 6 months, they had filed a new intent to purchase parcels along the lane. 2 were already under option. Ours had a note. Harper Trust dual consent required. A clerk with eyebrows like reprimands informed us that any challenge would likely involve court, money, and unpleasantness. We left with copies of documents and that particular exhaustion that comes from paying attention for too long. Outside, the sky had pulled on its evening lavender. I fished in my bag for my phone to call a taxi. That's when I saw the text from my son Daniel. Mum, don't make any hasty decisions. I've found a buyer who will let you stay in the cottage for 2 years. It's the best you'll get. Love you. It should have read like care. It read like a choice already made elsewhere. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. He's already working with them, I said softly. My boy. Evelyn, who had no ring on her finger and no child calling her, put her hand on my arm. He's not a bad man, she said. He's a frightened one, and frightened men do math with their mothers. I could not speak for a moment around the stone my heart had become. When I did, my voice surprised me with its clarity. Then we will teach him another kind of arithmetic. We returned to the cottage with our papers and our new knowledge, and I poured whiskey into 2 teacups because sometimes the theater of decency must sit down and let strength speak. We drank, and the liquor went through me like a good anger. Tomorrow, I said, though I was learning not to trust that word, Daniel is flying in. Evelyn nodded. Then the past will have its audience. And the garden, I said, will have its trial. Outside, the wind ran its hands through the willow leaves as if approving our plan. I touched the red tin, the deed, the locket in Evelyn's palm, and felt a chord tune in me I had not heard in decades. Not just survival, but guardianship. I was not a relic to be managed. I was the historian of a small country called my life. Let them come, I whispered to the photographs under the mattress and to the fox in the trees. We are ready to be found. Daniel arrived, looking thinner than his voice, his hair receding in a way that made me want to stroke the boy back onto his head. He kissed my cheek, the calculation of pity in the gesture wounding me more than if he had slapped me. He smelled of airport and impatience. "Mum," he began in the tone men use when they intend to fold their mothers like laundry, "you can't manage this place alone. I've done the practical thing. A developer will pay above market. They'll maintain the exterior and let you keep 2 rooms. You'll have care. You'll have 2 rooms in my own house," I said, and let the words sit between us like a small animal we were both deciding whether to respect. He frowned. "You always go for poetry when numbers are needed, and you always go for numbers when love is needed," I replied, surprising us both with my accuracy. "Do you know a man named Whitby?" He hesitated just enough. "They're reputable. They watched my bins," I said mildly, "and they stole my recipes." He sat back, irritation loosening his control. "Mom, don't be ridiculous." Evelyn brought tea and did not speak. She wore her silence like armor. Daniel looked at her the way men look at women who don't fit into the script they have already written. "Could we have a moment?" he asked, meaning without the help. "No," I said, and watched him adjust to this version of me with visible discomfort. I set the red tin and the deed on the table. He glanced at them, dismissive at first, then again, as if something on their surfaces had shifted the light. "What are these?" "Your father's apology," I said, "and your inheritance of responsibility." He picked up the deed, skimmed, then read, his face learning how to be complicated. "E.M., he said slowly. "Who is E.M.? "Evelyn," I said. "Your sister." He laughed, a brittle sound I had never heard from his childhood throat. "This is absurd. It is the truest thing in this room," I said. He looked at Evelyn as if she had changed the rules of a game he meant to win. "You're a liar," he snapped. "You've manipulated an old woman." "Daniel," I said, and there must have been something in my voice because he stopped, astonishment loosening his mouth. In all his life I had used that tone twice, once when he was 6 and stole sweets, and once when he was 17 and thought he could lie to me about a broken window. "Sit. Listen." And I told him as cleanly as I could the story of his father's love, his father's failure, his father's attempt at repair in the language of ink and law. I told him about the man in the white car, about the decoy envelope, about the bank and the covenant and the trust. I told him about the locket with 2 faces in it, and how a man can love more than one person without diminishing his affection, but how silence ferments into something sour that no one wants to drink. He listened because facts have a way of annexing even the most stubborn countries. When I finished, he stared at the deed again, as if it might reorder itself if he willed it enough. "Even if this is true," he said at last, "the market—" "Stop," I said, and my voice was not old. "There will be no market in my kitchen. There will be my husband's words, and my son's conscience, and the measure of a woman who has kept this garden alive longer than you have been able to keep any of your flats." He flushed. It was an unfair strike. I knew the scattered humiliations of his divorces, the long string of jobs he had been too clever to be happy in. But sometimes mothers must use unfairness like smelling salts. "Do you know a man named Whitby?" I asked again. He looked away. They approached me. They said they could solve everything. Your care, the distance. They said you'd be looked after. And you believed men who steal rubbish? He put his face in his hands. For a moment he looked like the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder in church. When he lifted his head, the anger had melted. In its place was something closer to shame. I listened to them because I'm tired, he said, because I'm scared of losing you and of failing you, because I'm not as good as your faith in me. I reached across the table and laid my hand on his wrist. Then be good now, I said. It is not too late to stop being poor in your soul. He nodded, slow as sunrise. The doorbell rang. Evelyn and I exchanged a look. She went to the window. Whitby the younger, she murmured, and a gentleman with eyebrows like a promise. I could have called the police. I did not. I opened the door and let the men into my house because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is invite the wolf into the parlor and show him the portraits of every shepherd who has loved this land. Mrs. Harper, said the older man. I recognized the jaw of empire from the photograph in the red tin. I'm Walter Whitby. This is my son, Graham. We've come to make this easy. Ah, I said, easy. The favorite word of men who have never carried a difficult thing across decades. He smiled the way men smile when they are unused to being understood. I admire your spirit, he lied. But the county intends to move forward with the bypass. Your property is a linchpin. We are prepared to pay generously and add a clause to allow you to remain in 2 rooms. 2 rooms, I said again, because sometimes repetition glues absurdity to the wall. Daniel cleared his throat. My mother is not selling. Walter's gaze flicked to him with mild contempt. This is not your decision. It is exactly my decision, I said, laying the deed on the table like a card that takes the trick. And it is also hers. I nodded to Evelyn, who stepped forward with a steadiness that transformed the room's gravity. Walter scanned the document. The moment his eyes found dual consent required, his face changed in the small way clever men's faces move when they understand they have underestimated a woman. E.M., he said. And who is that? The other beneficiary, I said. The one you would have liked to remain a ghost. He placed the paper down carefully. A man adjusting to a world in which his hunger has been put on a diet. A court may find this. We will go to court, I said, the pronoun a new muscle I liked the feel of, and the court will read my husband's covenant and his notebook and his admiration for maps and his contempt for men who eat them. Walter's mouth tightened. He turned to go, then turned back with the smallest of bows to his own appetite. This isn't over. No, I said, my voice tender as a blade. It's begun. They left with their easy walk taught to them by schools and conclaves, and the air in the cottage grew sweet again, as if the house had been holding its breath to avoid smelling them. Daniel exhaled the longest breath of his life. I'm sorry, he said to me. And to you, he said to Evelyn, the apology moving across bloodlines as if river water had found the sea at last. We ate together that night stew and bread, humble food for a humbled family, After, I asked Daniel to sleep in his old room. He did. I sat with Evelyn at the table where the day had become a different story, and we held hands across the wood, two ends of a rope finally connected. "It is not done," she said. "No," I agreed, "but we are no longer alone." Outside, the garden breathed. The night wore a quiet that felt like a companion instead of a threat. I slept, for the first time in months, like a woman not waiting for a shovel. In stories, justice arrives with trumpets. In real life, it comes in the mild shoes of clerks and the firm voices of women who have decided they are done being gentle with greed. The weeks that followed knitted themselves into a new tapestry. Meetings with solicitors who smiled at my stubbornness, letters to the council that struck a tone between him and Curse, Daniel, awkward and earnest, learning to make tea for the first time since he was 12. Whitby Holdings pushed. They threatened injunctions, they performed their tired waltz of inevitable progress. But the covenant was a spine, and our town, bless it, had a memory for foxes and maps. Neighbors who once waved and forgot my name began to stop at my gate. The baker brought seed cakes and signatures. The vicar preached about stewardship in a way that made even the fences listen. Evelyn spoke at a council meeting, her voice a clear bell. "This cottage is not a commodity. It is a testament of a man's failure and attempt at repair, of a wife's endurance, of a daughter's right to be named. If you turn this garden into geometry, you will not be building a road, you will be paving over an apology." People cheered. I watched her and saw my husband's mouth and my own eyebrows and thought, this is what the world means when it says remnant. The part that remains becomes the whole again. One evening, when the willow leaves were new enough to be that strange green like a promise nobody is sure they can keep, Daniel and I walked the garden together. We stopped at the place where the trapdoor lay invisible beneath the soil, and he crouched to touch the earth. "I love it here," he said, as if admitting a weakness he hoped might be admired. "I hated it when I was a boy because it felt small. Now it feels like the exact size of the truth." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Then keep it with us," I said. "Don't try to sell the truth to men who will cut it into lanes." We planted hydrangeas there, blue as old china, stubborn as widows. Evelyn chose the spot and showed Daniel where to place the root ball with a tenderness that felt like the laying on of hands. When we were done, we stood and admired our planting the way ordinary families admire newborns, exhausted and pleased with the miracle of something that will live if fed. The legal fight did not require a courtroom in the end. Whitby's solicitor, a practical man who did arithmetic with reputation as well as money, advised settlement. They withdrew their intent to purchase our parcel. The county recited their bypass a mile away on brownfield land left by a factory that had given the town cancer and then moved to a country that manufactured cancers differently. The papers called it a victory for common sense. I called it Charles finally speaking clearly. On the first Sunday after the council vote, we ate in the garden ham and mustard, the mustard fierce enough to remind us we were alive. I set the locket on the table between us like bread. "You should wear it," I told Evelyn. "It won't break again." She fastened it around her neck, and the sun found it. For a thrilling second, I saw two faces inside my young self, and the infant I had not met when the photograph was taken, and I whispered to the air, "I forgive you," not knowing whether I meant my husband or time or myself, and discovering it did not matter. Forgiveness is a blanket. It warms whoever it covers. Daniel raised his glass. "To missing pieces," he said. "Found." We drank. The toast went down like a benediction. A week later, a parcel arrived with no return address, just my name, in a careful hand that was trying not to remember how to write to me. Inside was a small box of recipes, handwritten, in a woman's script I did not know, stained with butter and grief. On top, a note, "I am sorry for the bin. A man can be taught. If you ever sell jam at the fete, I like strawberry." It was signed G. Whitby. I laughed aloud, the startled, open laugh the very old and the very young share when the world unexpectedly behaves. I wrote back without a return address of my own. There will be jam. It will not be for sale. I kept Charles's notebook by my chair. Sometimes, in the evenings, I read his tidy entries and talked to him as if he were in the next room, oiling a hinge to keep the world from squeaking. I tell him about our daughter, how she stands in my kitchen and the kettle begins to understand new kinds of steam, how she walks the garden with a gait that corrects the path simply by using it. I tell him about our son, how he sits in a solicitor's office and learns that protection can be more profitable than selling, how he phones me twice a week without a click on the line. The man in the white car stopped coming. The lane learned the shape of a different traffic. Children on bicycles, old men gossiping, the occasional fox trotting like a thought that decides to be seen. On warm nights, neighbors bring chairs, and we tell stories in the soft light beneath the oak. We do not mention Whitby or covenants or the bypass unless the moon demands a little drama. Mostly we talk about small things that are large if you live inside them. As for the garden, my wild, loyal friend, it forgave us as gardens do, quickly and completely. The hydrangeas took with a fierce enthusiasm that made me suspect plants gossip about our business in their underground way, and had decided to root for us. The spot where the trapdoor lies is secret again, not because I am afraid, but because some secrets want to be kept to remind us that not everything important must be seen to be believed. On the morning we set the last document in the solicitor's hands, formalizing what my husband had intended, I walked the perimeter of the cottage alone. I touched the stone where my fingerprints now live more than skin deep. I spoke out loud so the walls could hear me and answer with warmth. "I am not lonely," I told the house. "I am a country with citizens." Evelyn met me at the back steps, holding a small wooden box. "I found this in the shed," she said, a nervous brightness in her eyes. Look, inside lay the rusted hinges from the first garden chest we had dug up, and beneath them a photograph of Charles on the day we bought the cottage. He was young enough to look like a promise struggling to keep itself. On the back, in that familiar hand, he had written, "Bury what must be hidden, but only long enough to make a harvest." We planted a pear tree where the second hole had been the empty one, the almost harm. When we finished, I pressed my palm against the new soil and felt, I swear, the future turn toward us like a face, realizing it has been called by its true name. In the evening, we sat on the veranda. The willow hissed an old melody. Daniel came out with a tray tea, 2 cups, and a little jug of milk, because he had finally learned that care lives in the details, the careless call fussy. The locket glinted at Evelyn's throat. The house breathed, and I began. Not for the camera of any channel, not for an audience made of numbers, but for the people who hold my geography together. I once thought peace was silence, I said. Then I learned peace is voices of those you love, of those you forgive, of those you choose. It is the sound a shovel doesn't have to make any more. The night grew kind. The pear tree, brave and foolish, believed in spring. Somewhere a fox stepped delicately across the lane, as if to say, I, too, am part of what survives. And I, an old woman with a garden and a country called Margaret that had finally reopened its borders, closed my eyes on the good kind of tired, the kind that comes after you have dug through earth and paper and pride and found astonishingly, not emptiness, but family. That is the story of the box my caretaker buried in my garden, and of what I found when I opened it, not merely photographs or deeds, not merely the covetous eyes of men in white cars, but a reaching across years by a husband who failed and then tried, by a son who counted wrong and then learned to count again, by a daughter who came home before she knew it was home. The shock was not betrayal. The shock was how much love had survived underground, waiting, patient as roots, for two women with a lantern and old bones to lift the lid and let it breathe. And when the breeze came up from the meadow and carried the scent of wet soil and pear blossom across the porch, I understood the simplest arithmetic my husband had ever written, 2 initials on a deed, 1 garden, and a sum that is not a number. We sat there until the stars came out, stubborn and faithful, and the house, satisfied, tucked itself around us like a quilt stitched by a woman whose hands had finally remembered how to rest.